Well, good afternoon. It's great to welcome you to Exploring Catholicism. One of the great things about exploring Catholicism is to see the way in which the Holy Spirit is continuing to bring about the great gift of Jesus Christ into our hearts, minds, and souls. And today, as we film, we're stepping into the month of June, which is the month of the Sacred Heart, the month of Corpus Christi, the month to just really allow ourselves to allow the Holy Spirit to put us in rhythm with the heart of Christ. And I'm joined here, co-hosted, new flavor to the show today, by my dear sister-in-law, Regina, who, speaking of heartbeats, have a heartbeat inside of her. As one of her famous children once said, "Where's your baby?" And the little boy said, "He's in your belly." Exactly. So it's great to have Regina Donahue here joining me as we get to welcome a tremendous guest in just a couple minutes, in which we'll bring her on. But I thought that I would just lead a little prayer that's in the back of a book that we're going to be getting into. I call it St. Patrick's Breastplate, and it's something that I wake up to every morning. And so I thought it was providential that perhaps we would start into this by just going into prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And this is what St. Patrick wrote. "I arise today through almighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through a belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. I arise today through the strength of Christ's birth and his baptism, through the strength of his crucifixion and his burial, through the strength of his resurrection and ascension, through the strength of his descent for the judgment of doom. I arise today through the strength of the love of the cherubim, in obedience to the angels and service to the archangels, in the hope of the resurrection, and to meet with reward in the prayers of the patriarchs, in the preachings of the apostles, in the faiths of confessors, in the innocence of virgins, in the deeds of righteous men. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in the eye that sees me, Christ in the ear that hears me." And so we ask for the intercession of St. Patrick, one of the great saints of all time, and our dear St. Joseph during this year, to bless this show. In the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, it is truly a grace to be able to welcome to a program a tremendous author. I love Regina, how she prides herself of being like a philosopher. She's a theologian. She's an editor, but also she's a great mom and a tremendous woman. And so it's just so great to be able to see all those facets come together. What's your interest? Like, why are you here? Like, what's your interest in Carrie Gress, our great program person today?
Well, I'm here with a lot of gratitude because Carrie has been one of my favorite Catholic writers for a few years now. And what she does so beautifully in the first book I read of her, the AntiMary Exposed, is she kind of draws out the lies that are in radical feminism. And she points to kind of where women are caught in between two poles. And I think a lot of us growing up feel caught and we're not really sure where the freedom is. And so she spells out this lie, but she does something that a lot of writers never get to, which she provides the antidote. She provides the freedom, and it's in our Blessed Mother, and it's in the Catholic faith. And whenever I read the book, the first parts of the book, you're kind of like facing a lot of things. And in the second part of the book, you're just filled with so much peace and so much excitement to go out and be the woman that God created you to be. And then she continues this antidote with Theology of Home, and allowing and encouraging women to find the eternal meanings of things in daily life, in the mundane. And it's very powerful, it's very freeing, and I just admire the way that she's been able to integrate that into her professionalism and as well into just her daily life of being a mom.
And you've done something similar, right? In terms of your work with pro-life, your work with some of the secondhand stores you work with, and juggling all your children, right?
I wouldn't put myself quite in the same category, Father Jay, but I appreciate the comparison. I think that we are all trying as women to figure out where God is calling us. And so much of the writing in Carrie Gress's work just kind of allows us to figure out, where has God created me to be whole? where has he created me to express my feminine genius in the world? But first, where is he and how is he creating me to express that feminine genius in my home, with my family, and in my vocation?
That's fantastic. So as you can imagine, I'm just thrilled to be able to welcome to our program Dr. Carrie Gress. And as she comes on the screen here, I hope that all of us are able to be able to recognize behind the scenes, she has several kids. She's got a whole construction project going on in her house. So, Carrie, if any of those things happen, we're ready for it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Like for me, when I go to church and mass, to celebrate mass, and I hear kids crying and moms scrambling, I always see that's our future children choir. It's fantastic to have noise and restlessness in our churches, whether it be Cheerios being thrown at each other, a kid storming, raging the altar. I think it's just fantastic to have the chaos of kids, because it's to them that the Lord has them. Carrie, welcome to the program. Just a quick question for you. You love Mary so much. What's your favorite image of Mary? Is there a go-to image where you really have found a deeper relationship with her, or is there something, an image that you really tend to your go-to Mary image?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you for having me on. This is really fun. I love Pittsburgh. When I went to Steubenville, I got teased a lot because like every other day I was driving to Pittsburgh because I just couldn't take Steubenville. So I was always, trying to find the best coffee shops and used bookstores, and it's before GPS too. So I spent a lot of time getting lost in Pittsburgh. So anyway, I just love the city. But as far as our Blessed Mother, the one that I have really developed a devotion to is Our Lady Star of the Sea, Stella Maris. And part of that is because I got married in a Star of the Sea church. One of my first books was inspired in the Star of the Sea church, Stella Maris Church down in Sullivan's Island in South Carolina. So she just kept appearing, but it's one of the oldest devotions. And I feel like, the world is so chaotic that we just need this constant star to guide us. And that's what it really feels like. So, we've taken it a step further. I actually have a line of candles that are named after her, Stella Maris and Company candles that about 5 years ago, I guess, I was looking at these great soy candles, and I turned over one of them that had been given to me as a gift, and it said, all proceeds go to animal shelters, and, fine enough causes. But I thought, why aren't Catholics making these? We have the best art, we have the best scents, the way things smell. Why can't we use some of these in soy candles? And so I asked around a little bit, and other people if other people were making them, and finally came back, in prayer that my husband and I were supposed to make them, which is pretty funny because I'm the least crafty person I know. I'm allergic to crafts. So we are now making them in our house. In fact, we just poured another 200 of them over the weekend, and it's just been amazing how God has really blessed this effort, because people get them for their friends, they get them for family members, they have them blessed, and then they give them as gifts. And it's just amazing to hear the stories of, how Our Lady is working through these candles in people's lives.
So we put that up. Is that the correct link that people could get to?
Yeah.
It's on your theologyofhome.com website under collections.
Yep.
Okay, great. Hopefully we'll encourage all of our people. Are those candles also, are they fitting for like home masses? So sometimes I'll do home masses in Regina's home. Would that be a fitting candle to have lit for that, or no?
They would. We have some actually that are made with a chrism scent. So in fact, I just talked to one of the Nashville Dominicans who said that they have one in their chapel, and every morning they walk in and they can smell the chrism as it's burning. So I have another priest in St. Louis that just ordered a bunch for Easter. And I know that they have been used liturgically as well. So anyway, it's been a really fun journey. Just, we're working on one right now with spikenard, and we're going to call it the Magdalene candle, and really just try to evoke that sense of, someone else relate to Mary Magdalene and that desire to wipe Christ's feet clean with the spikenard, like she did at Easter or before the crucifixion. So anyway, I think, there's just so much richness there. So we're really trying to put that in people's hands in a very, very tangible way.
That's powerful. This morning I was talking to one of our dear parishioners. They just had a girl, and they named the girl Madeline after Mary Magdalene. Magdalene after Mary Magdalene. And
Very
so
sweet
it's
name.
good to hear her name again twice in one day. Even though we're after the Easter Council, it's always good to invoke St. Mary Magdalene, especially in a discussion that we're going to jump into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Carrie, can you give a little bit of a background to how you see the feminist movement, how it developed a second, especially that quote unquote second wave feminism that has been something, I think, of an adversary to what I would say St. John Paul II saw in feminine genius, and obviously is the exact opposite of the image that Mary, that the Holy Spirit brought to us through Mary. Just to give a little context for the book of AntiMary, which we'll get into in a minute. But I think for me, when I've heard you speak to this, it's been interesting to hear how you have seen this supposedly movement that was supposed to help women actually enslave women. But anyway, could you talk a little bit about that, the 1960s movement of feminism and where you see that in terms of some of the books and things that you've been writing?
Well, I mean, I dug a lot into the 1960s and just trying to see what was happening, what was going on. Obviously, I wasn't alive at that stage. And what, we all know that there's an ethos in every age and that there's kind of a spirit that the Gestalt that sort of takes over a period. And so I was really interested in what happened in the 60s. And I was just amazed to see kind of this repeated pattern come up over and over again of women both embracing Marxism as well as the occult. And, these two really just kind of between those two things blending together, which I lay out extensively in the book, as well as the use of media. I think that is a piece that we just can't overlook at all. It's just the power that women like Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem, the way they used the media for their message, because they looked great. They were very stylish. They were very attractive. They were very well spoken. And so the message just really took off, that, they had the route to really achieve happiness. And, it ends up being this very schizophrenic relationship with men where, women are told that they have to, in order to be happy, they have to be like men. But then men also have to become more like women. And so it really got to this point where, women were considered the priority, but only women that were much more like men than what women are. So it was all kind of a jumbled mess. And yet those are the ideas that really took off. And it's amazing, to see today that the sound bites and the arguments that they make are really the same. I haven't had to change that much because they've had so little pushback from certainly those of us in the church and from the culture at large that, they can still blame things on the patriarchy and everybody's like, oh yeah, the patriarchy's fault, without even questioning, well, what do you mean it's the patriarchy's fault? So anyway, it's an interesting thing to see just how, I was shocked to see how diametrically opposed they are to Our Lady. Because initially I just thought maybe they're just kind of listed a little bit to the left. And then the more you look into kind of the underbelly of all this, you see that really there's Marxism there, this idea of making women kind of robots or robotnik is that Soviet word of worker, where you're unencumbered by children and you just work, much like men. And so we can see that really playing itself out now and how unpopular it really is for women to say that they're a stay-home mom, or, we feel like we have to sort of justify it with added things that we're doing or something, that's not enough. And I think these are all just the afterburn of what happened in the 60s that we keep adding fuel to it and allowing ourselves to be, fed this lie over and over again.
Yeah, and it seems like overall that part of this feminist movement is to try to portray anybody like you or my sister-in-law here as kind of some type of handmaid. You got your bonnet, you're barefoot, pregnant, and you deserve to be stuck in a kitchen with a little apron around you, wondering if you understand the world outside. And so anybody who would actually study, be able to articulate any type of idea, obviously that's, so could you speak a little bit to that kind of maybe how you have felt from being forced into a box about being a woman that doesn't seem to actually go with your identity?
No, I think that's a great point. And that's one of the things they've been so successful in doing because they control the media, the fashion industry, book publishing, TV, politics, Hollywood, all of that. They've really made it just this closed system where if you're an outsider, they just sort of bounce off of them, or they can either humiliate you or they ignore you, is usually how it works. And so you don't hear other voices. And so most women have no idea that there's really another way to even think about their womanhood, because this is just, this is what we've been told, what I've been told, Regina's been told since, the earliest stages of our life, probably not from our parents or necessarily, but from the culture. The culture is telling us this. So yeah, it's definitely a challenge. But, one of the things that's been really interesting, I had someone come to me, a professor, after this book came out, and she said, "How can you get away with writing this?" And I said, "I can get away with writing this because I don't have a professorship anywhere. Nobody can fire me. If if all of this goes away, I still am a stay-at-home mom, and I'm very happy, raising my children. And this is, all sort of wonderful and a blessing to be able to share this, but this isn't the be all end all of my life." So I have a real freedom that unfortunately I think a lot of women who do have jobs that they can be fired from aren't able to speak up in the way that I can. And I think that's, makes it all the more incumbent upon those of us that have this kind of freedom to speak out. But yeah, it's always very interesting to sort of see the reaction, because, I do have a PhD in philosophy, and I think more than anything, it's, I'm seeing more people ignore my work rather than trying to ostracize it, because it doesn't go well. Partially because it's most of the research I've done is pretty watertight, and they're not used to pushback either. That's the other thing, is they're so used to everybody just agreeing with them that they don't know how to respond to people that are actually pushing back against those arguments. And you find very quickly that they've never really thought in any kind of depth about it. So yeah, I think that is one of the things that a lot of us have going for us, is just this capacity to recognize that there is this great weakness there. And if you can share some of these ideas, or even live these ideas in a radical witness, without, poking people in the eye or being rude or, what have you. I think those are important things that we need to do, is just to remind and help other people know that there's another way to live than what the culture is telling us.
So jumping into the book, the first thing that struck me is that it was banned on a couple of the social media outlets. Yeah. And as I read it, I'm like, well, this is a book that trying to contrast or give a kind of a contrast. There's an Antichrist, and you say that as well, obviously. There's actually a spirit of an AntiMary. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, it's published by Tan Books. And it has a picture on the front. Obviously, it has some interesting images on it, but it's basically people who are going to a March for Life. What
the Women's March? The Women's March.
Yeah. Sorry, it was like what happened there? Could you take us briefly through the storyline on that, and what was your experience of being banned on some of these social media books? I mean, you look like you're definitely a radical to our culture. That we have to be careful about you.
Very dangerous. Yeah, no, it was really interesting, because this book came out 2 years before it was banned. So it wasn't like it just came out and it was some kind of splashy thing that they were trying to prevent. It's been out for 2 years. And what happened was that Instagram and Facebook, both their own, obviously both by Facebook, but a store down in Florida was trying to post the book on the marketplace at Facebook. And Facebook said, this book violates our community standards, or something to that effect. And so they sent that image to me, and I was like, what's going on? They've already had sold it previously. Other people have sold it on Facebook and Instagram. And so I just thought, maybe this is just a fluke. And then later that day, they tried to do the same thing on Instagram. And sure enough, Instagram wouldn't let them post it either. And, we looked into it on several different ways with the publisher, and just trying to get to the bottom of it. And then the bookstore was trying to get to the bottom of it. But it happened, 3 or 4 days after Biden's inauguration. So, the timing was odd. Then what also happened was people were really angry and bought the book, by the boatload. And so the book went up to, I think, like 232 out of all of Amazon's books. And at that point, they sold out of the stock that they had at Amazon. But you know how when you order a book on Amazon, it's not in stock, they'll just say available, at a future date, and that date's listed, and you can still buy it, but you just know it won't be delivered. Well, they actually took that piece down. So you could buy it from secondhand sellers, and those actually ran out quickly. But you couldn't actually buy it for like another week. And, you know, it could have been a fluke, but they would put it up and then it would come back down, and they would put it up and it would come back down. So I think what they were actually really trying to do was make sure it didn't get into like the top 100, because it was #1 on feminist theory, which was just, or it was #1 or 2, I can't remember, but it was just amazing to see the books that were right next to it, because they were just the epitome of, you know, the anti-Marian spirit. I think one of them was a nearly naked woman, you know, with some of the imagery of Our Lady of Guadalupe, like a total blasphemous image, you know, right next to my book. So anyway, again, you know, we don't have proof. I don't know, you know, how much who knows how much of these things were a glitch, but it was just interesting. Again, it's a 2-year-old book, and all of these things are happening within the first week of Biden's inauguration, like the same week. So anyway, it raised a lot of eyebrows, and it got a lot of attention, and, you know, it was great for the book in terms of just giving it a second life. And it just has been translated into Spanish, and we're trying to get that out as quickly as possible. I think it's really important for that population to know, you know, how they're being abused and taken advantage of, and, you know, and left unhappy. So anyway, but yeah, that was just a crazy couple of weeks. And, you know, at a certain point, someone was asking me questions about it, and I was like, look, I don't know. I'm not paying attention anymore. Like I'm homeschooling. I've got 5 kids. I've got a business. I've got books to write. You know, I don't have time to like stay on top of big tech. And, you know, the publisher has done a great job with it and handled it well. And, you know, it's, like I said, it's been great for the book, but at a certain point, you just got to move on and, you know, live your life, and pray that it doesn't happen. But of course it's, you know, happened to Ryan Anderson's book shortly after that. And, but I really think it was the subtitle with toxic femininity in it, that was what tipped it off. Rescuing the culture from toxic femininity.
Well, I do think a lot more people read the book as a result of that. So yeah, maybe there's a silver lining. I wanted to ask you, you spoke earlier about this kind of diametric opposition between the two stories that are presented about women. There's this radical feminism and then the authentic femininity that is really presented by the church. Do you think that there is common ground that we can find between those two versions? And if so, how do we go about finding that common ground?
Yeah. You know, I think that's a great question. And that's you know, it actually leads into my second book, Theology of Home, because I think that there are so many women who are really struggling and suffering and unhappy, and they don't know why they're unhappy. You know, I was one of these women, like, why I'm doing everything that the culture tells me I should be doing. I'm being assertive and aggressive, and I'm reaching for a degree, and I'm being ambitious and outspoken, you know, all these things, and I'm miserable. And I think that we can see that in what I call the happiness metrics, everything from, you know, depression rates, substance abuse, suicide, all of these point to really unhappy women. So I think that is actually a real place to start. And, you know, certainly the pandemic has, I think, led people to be open to thinking about things that they probably wouldn't have thought about before, because they feel the fragility of life in a way that they didn't feel it before. So I think all of those things play into it. But again, these conversations can't really happen without a context of knowing people and really loving people. And that's the hard part. You know, this isn't just, you know, sidewalk, street corner evangelization. This is really what women do best, which is get to know each other and love each other, you know, no matter where you're at. And I think, you know, so many of us have families like this and are in situations with our families and in-laws or cousins and, you know, people that we work with and whatnot, that we have close relationships with them, but we also sometimes wonder, like, what if they really knew what I thought about this? And I think that's one of those things that when you have that trust that you're building up through that relationship, at some point they really will know what you think about things, because it will come up. But it's not always a place to bring it up in, you know, those early moments of meeting somebody. But I think that's the other, you know, that's why Theology of Home, I think, has been so successful and such a great resource for women, because we all have homes. We all long to have beautiful homes. And, you know, no matter what our gifts are, we can relate to the idea of having a home. And it's obviously very popular in the culture right now. I think especially more with the lockdowns, people really want a sense of a sanctuary and a safe place. And, you know, just the amount of money that's been spent on renovations. In fact, I was just reading this morning, there was some builder site that the number one search on their site, like by 95%, was home extensions, because all these people want to add to their homes. And, we're going through this huge seller's market right now. And anyway, so I think the point is really just finding that place, or those places that we have in common with other women, and creating trust and love through those common places, instead of, starting out with a jousting, like, you're a radical feminist, like, you know how wrong you are. Like, those aren't the places to start. So anyway, and that's the beautiful thing that I think women have the capacity to do, is be compassionate and loving, and see what people's needs are, and address them in loving ways that's what really transforms hearts, instead of just the apologetics, or even just the debate. And that was a really hard lesson for me to learn, because, I have a PhD in philosophy. So I just thought I could just debate people into the truth. And, I learned very quickly, the hard way, many times, that just doesn't work most of the time. It's a much longer trajectory, and it just takes a lot more of yourself and self-giving and love and listening than really telling people what to think.
So a lot of empathy, a lot of interpersonal relationships. Okay, very good. Now, I do want to ask you, you are providing a guidepost for so many women on how to approach femininity and what to think of femininity. And you've been such a source of wisdom in that arena. I'm wondering, who were your guideposts, and how did you come to discover that this was really your calling and what you love to write about?
Yeah. Well, that's another funny thing too, because when I was in graduate school, I was like, I am never writing about women. I don't want to write about women. I hate women in this issue. Women's philosophy, like, I'm not doing it. So the funny part was, though, that when I guess I just had finished my PhD and finished my dissertation, and I had this one insight one morning that, I just kept, as a new mom, I probably had 2 or 3 kids at that point, but as a younger mom, I kept thinking that it was going to get easier. Like, just next week will be easier. Next week will be easier. And of course, it never got easier. There was always something new, whether it was the flu or teething or, you name it. And finally I was like, oh, it's not going to get easier. And it's not supposed to be easier. Like, I just noticed that this is how God transformed me from, narcissistic, shallow young woman into something much more beautiful and open and virtuous. And, it's how he transforms our will. It's a very natural way that God transforms the hearts of women. And I started really looking around, trying to find women that I wanted to be like. And it was really hard to find role models. There was one woman in particular. She was just this amazing woman. I think she had 6 kids, and then a huge number of grandchildren, and now great grandchildren. And she had a home on the Chesapeake Bay that she would open up to people. And she had retreats there and things like that. So I actually didn't live that far from her. So every now and again, I would just go spend the night at Mamu's house. That was her name, Mamu. And it was in her 80s, and she looked like her name should be Mamu. She was a larger woman, and yet everybody wanted to be around Mamu. I mean, she was just infectious, and she had this great, almost like girlish laugh, but just so dear and so wise. And, I could just sit and listen to Mamu for days. And anyway, Mamu died probably about 15 years ago now. But just what made Mamu. And, so much of that was, again, just her faith, obviously, but also she lived through the Second World War, and she just raised children, and she was just so virtuous. And that just really shone through who she was. So, she was really a guide for me in so many ways. But yeah, I think it can be very challenging, because a lot of my friends and people that I know, I've had friends say to me, I'm afraid to tell my mom or my mother-in-law that I'm pregnant again, because she's not going to be happy that we're having our 5th or 6th or 7th or, on and on child. Because there is that kind of pushback, because the culture's been saying for so long that you can't possibly be happy. Children are really the impediment. So anyway, yeah, it's been a long journey. And I know certainly our Blessed Mother has really, interjected herself into a lot of this. And there's, wonderful women like, certainly Edith Stein and Alice von Hildebrand, and, just amazing women that have written out there. But I don't think that a lot of the work on women. And this is why I didn't want to do work on women. I didn't think it was accessible. And there were very few books that I was like, I could give this to anybody I know and have them be amazed and engaged in it. That, like, I just didn't find those kinds of works. And that's what I really wanted my books to feel like, was that I could give it to, anybody I know, especially Theology of Home. I've given that so many different people, and they've all really gotten something out of it. So I think that was my reaction to it, was the Catholic faith has so much beauty, so much that it has given to us, and I know transformed my life dramatically. I would never give it up for anything, and yet other women don't know this. Why are we not telling other women about this in a way that they can hear it? So that's really been my goal, is how do we package this in a way that feels compelling and fresh and lovely and engaging, instead of full of jargon, tedious, inaccessible and hard to get through. Which is not to say that there isn't amazing work being done academically. There is, but we're very top heavy. We just haven't found a way how to get that, trickle it down on a popular level so that other women can absorb it very, very easily.
Well, I think you managed to accomplish that, especially because you have the combination of truth with beauty. And both of those things are expressed so perfectly in Theology of the Home, especially.
Yeah, no, and it was a fun project to photograph. We joke about how it's full of pictures that you're not supposed to show, lots of, dads looking like real men, and pregnant women, and lots of kids, and, all of that. So it's been a really amazing project to be involved in. We're actually working on a third one right now, Theology of Home at the Sea, which we just went out to California and took a bunch of pictures out at the beach with Noelle Maring's family. So that was great. And so that's going to be a fun one that will come out, I think, in next winter. But yeah, it's just one of those projects that I feel like at some point I'd love to have it become a magazine, and something that, our faith is so rich. We have so much to be able to offer, whether it's, if we did a quarterly one, you could do a seasonal one with all Lent and Advent and Christmas. And, we have so much that's so rich on the food level and fashion level and home level that I can really see it happen. And it's actually kind of shocking when you realize that there's about 35 million Catholic women in the United States, and we don't have anything on a broad scale for Catholic women. We've got some things, but people just haven't invested in it. I think we don't see that you change the culture through these popular products. This is why the feminists have such a hold on us, because they have all the popular products. In fact, I was talking to a school teacher this week, and she was saying, what a challenge it is to catechize 8th graders. And I said, yeah, because they go, at the end of the summer, they go watch movies about adventures, and the plan be abortifacients, that there's just it's packaged so well, everything against the faith, that we need to start pushing back more and adding, providing alternative. And that's also what we're doing with our store. There's not really a Catholic lifestyle guru, there's no Joanna Gaines that you could point to and say is Catholic. And yet, these are really important things for Catholics, to have the very tangible things. We know stuff is important, as George Weigel likes to say. We know that the tangible is really important to our faith and our homes and our lives. And so it's, this isn't some way to just make money, but in fact, it is a very important evangelical tool, I think, in our daily lives.
Do you have any wisdom on how to communicate these themes to children, and maybe at different ages, and how to inspire authentic masculinity and femininity in our sons and daughters?
Yeah, I think that's a great, huge question. I mean, the biggest thing obviously is just living it, and giving them role models to see. And I think that's one of the things that's hardest. In fact, Noelle Maring, my co-author, and I talk about this a lot, that it's just hard to find role models. It's hard to find people. We have a lot in the culture. There's a lot of young women, both in the church, both evangelicals, and then, in the secular world, of young women who are very charismatic. They're very attractive. They carry themselves well, and they speak beautifully, but they don't have the formation to really carry off the kind of influence that they have. And so then some storm comes along, and they're just crushed by it. They end up being ushered out, that, or they're teaching heresy, or, they're just not formed well enough. And I think that that's one of the big struggles that we have is, how do we promote those who are really solid and healthy and ordered. But I think it also has a lot to do with just even on that basic familial level, being around other people that are holy, other families that are holy. That parish community is really invaluable. And I think that that's a hard piece, especially now with COVID and social distancing. And, hopefully some of that is coming back in small ways. But I think that's really an important element, is just those building up a community and being around other people that embody what true masculinity is and true femininity is, and providing role models for our children. But yeah, and that's not to say that there aren't great resources out there either. I think that's the other amazing thing, is we do have a lot of new things coming down the pike, probably in the last 10 years, even actually within, I've been publishing books now, I think for 5 or 6 years. And even since when I started, initially children's books where nobody was publishing them. And now a lot of places are publishing them. So attitudes, I think, about children and catechesis and certainly homeschooling have really changed and kind of, upped their game a little bit in terms of reach and what's available to help us with our work as parents.
If you, when you talked about your book here, the AntiMary Exposed, which I encourage everybody to get a copy if you can actually buy it off of Amazon. I think it currently is available on Amazon. But you talk a little bit, or could you talk to a bit about how you structured the book? I believe the first half's kind of as a tough, just really a brute look at what's going on. The second half gives a lot of hope. And then obviously your Theology of the Home gives the greatest anecdote to it all. But could you talk a little bit about the overall structure of it, what you're trying to achieve, and just being able to weave this whole theme of the AntiMary Exposed?
Yeah. When I started this book, I knew it had to be 2 parts, because I've read so many books, and I'm sure you guys have read them too, where you close the book and you're like, that was so depressing. I have no idea. The world's going to end, like, go find a cave kind of thing. And I didn't want to leave people with that. I really wanted just to give some positive attributes of who Our Lady was. And I think that that's been something that we haven't done a great job of either. I'm friends with Mark Mirabale and a lot of really great Mariologists, and they have such amazing content. And I was like, how come we're not putting that content, in places where women can read it in a way that they can read it? Because you go to Marian conferences, or, it's usually not populated by a lot of young women. It just isn't. Unfortunately. And so it occurred to me, like, how do I make Mary accessible? Because so often we just think of her as very, she's distant from us, or she's kind of one-dimensional, or she's just a, pious statue in our churches. And, how do I make her feel like a real person to us? And I know I struggled with that, most of my life, feeling like I really could relate to her. So anyway, the first half was really hard and painful. It was 2 years of research, and I can't tell you how happy I was when I didn't have to keep looking up every demonic source and all this awful content on women. But the second half was actually quite fun, because you've mentioned earlier before we got started, just that I focused on these 3 elements that women know about themselves, or that drive women. One, we want to do the good. And this is what's interesting about looking at radical feminists, is they think that they are doing good. They think that the things that they're doing are actually fundamentally good. They just are wrong about them, unfortunately. But that's an impulse that women have. Another one is to be known and loved, and to have the dignity afforded to that, who they are. And then the third one, of course, is beauty. What a vital piece that is, and how disordered we have we've really twisted that concept of beauty, and we don't understand what it's for. It's what it really is for people to see God in us, and to help point the way to God. And that's what Our Lady does with her beauty. In fact, when I was researching my book, The Marian Option, I was just overwhelmed by how many times I read, every apparition, they said it was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Saint Therese says you would die just so you could see her again. She's so beautiful. So those 3 pieces came together, and it was after I turned my manuscript in that then I went and on a trip with my daughters, and we were in a hotel room, and someone had said, "Oh, you should watch the Hallmark Channel." And so sure enough, we watched 2 movies that night. And then one of my daughters got sick in the middle of the night, so we watched a 3rd movie. And by the end of those 3 movies, I was like, I got it. But their recipe is what women want, exactly what I had laid out in my book. The desire to do good. It's that woman who's going home to save the library, and she meets the boy next door, or their long lost classmate or whomever. So she's got that desire of being known and loved, and she's always very beautiful while she's doing it, and very chic and all of that. So that's the recipe, and that's why they're like laughing all the way to the bank, because they know the heart of women. But obviously, Our Lady knows it better, lives it better, shows us better how to live it. And all of that just comes back to, again, she has all of these things, and she is all of these things because her will is so united to God. And that's not something that's inaccessible to us. That's something that we can have, and that we can do, and that we can be, really, through the sacraments, through the church, through confession, through what the faith gives us, is that accessibility to a real relationship with God, where we're known and loved as his beloved daughters, as we are. So anyway, I think that's the exciting piece that we need to communicate. And that's what I really wanted to come out in that second part was, I'm not just here saying, isn't she beautiful, or isn't that a lovely statue, or telling stories about her, but I wanted to be able to connect that really to the true hearts of women, and what we all really long for and desire to have in our lives.
Carrie, how would you express what or who the Spirit of AntiMary is? You begin this book by saying that in the early 1970s, 12 women, probably taking from the biblical 12 of the apostles and the tribes of Israel, sat around and said, why are we here today? To make a revolution, a cultural revolution, by destroying the American family. How do we do that? By destroying the American patriarch. How do we do that? By taking his power. How do we do that? By destroying monogamy. How do we do that? By promoting promiscuity, eroticism, prostitution, abortion, homosexuality. And this came from dear Mallory Millett, who I believe her sister was one of the real brainchilds behind the feminism movement. Can you kind of describe what you see, maybe even today through some movements, that truly are the AntiMary?
Yeah, no, and this is a great question, because I don't mean it as an individual. St. John, in one of his letters, talks about a spirit of the Antichrist. And that's what I mean, is it's a general spirit that is sort of taken hold of many women. In fact, one of the exorcists I talked to said, this isn't something that we would be vulnerable to if we weren't sinful, but because of our sins, we were opened up to this kind of anti-Marian spirit. So it makes sense from that way. But that quote came from Mallory Millett, who was Kate Millett's sister. Kate Millett was on Time magazine. She wrote the horrible book, Sexual Politics, that landed her on Time magazine, but also really the founders behind all of the women's studies programs in our universities. That's, one of the classic textbooks is to read that book. And what you can see, what happened with this, it's amazing to think about the women saying that back in the 1970s, because none of those things, that you read that last line again, eroticism, abortion, homosexuality, prostitution, those are not things that were openly talked about or promoted or part of the culture, really. I mean, certainly abortions happened and prostitution happened, but these weren't things that were up and coming. There was no Pride Day, that this is all new. So they were quite possibly, just think about how radically successful they were. You've got these 12 women in New York City that just unleashed, because again, of all these, just the culture was ripe for it in so many ways. And the lies that they told, and the media, and, again, all of that, so successful in terms of using that, anti-evangelization, or that, evangelizing their own awful message, and how much it spread. But it's really, you can see how those pieces are really the cornerstone of what has happened with LGTB movement. Because if you don't have radical feminism, you never would end up with the LGTB movement, and that idea that gender is fluid and can be changed, and sexuality is somehow disconnected from fertility. All of those pieces play into this. And so you can see kind of these pieces building on it, and really exacerbating the brokenness that we already have, and making it more, broken people break other people. And that's definitely what we have seen with radical feminism. So Yeah, it's amazing what a foothold it has, and just the confusion that it has sown about what it even means to be a boy or a girl or man or woman. All of that started right there in that room with those 12 women. So it's pretty scary, but I think it's also really hopeful because it means if they can do that with just 12 women, think of what we could do if so many of us really embraced Our Lady and the church and God's will and united in fighting this. In fact, I was watching a video just last night about the patriarchy, and it was just one of those things. It was like, how have we allowed this lie that men and the things that men bring to the culture, which is protection, providing, and procreation? How is it we have allowed this lie to perpetuate itself so long that just was a construct to oppress women? Why have we accepted that? So I think it's just pushing back on these lies and saying, we're not going to accept this anymore. But also finding new ways to communicate that through, again, things that are beautiful and compelling. And pushing against the culture instead of just trying to use apologetics or something.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I love how you talk about in one of the parts here, AntiMary or Antichrist, AntiMary, and you go into Mary she reverses Eve's rejection. And as one of the saints said, as a woman brought humanity under the power of Satan, one theologian echoes early, God would liberate humanity with cooperation of a woman. And isn't it true, at least for me it is, I see it in my own family, I see it in our community, that women truly do unleash an incredible amount of influence in our society. Mm-hmm. And when it's claimed and done out of love and care for and out of a deeper experience of the Lord, it can create and be so incredible. But the opposite is true. So you either have these 12 women doing that, or you have women like you or Regina going against that culture to really try to allow the pro-Marian influence of women to speak to its heart. What has been the reaction from other colleagues or other people across your landscape there, Carrie, with this book?
Actually, it's really interesting. One of the most interesting things was to just see the reaction of some family members when I was on the cover of the front page of Russia Today. And one family member, a male family member, sent it out to everybody. And, I was shocked because I had done a TV show with them, but I didn't realize it was going to be on the front page of it. But it was interesting to see the males were all really supportive and, go Carrie. And there was crickets from so many of the women. And so it's just really interesting to me, I think, to see how, again, just what a grip it is that the culture has on women. But yeah, one of the things I really would love to do is actually write a book similar to this, but have it actually be more to a secular audience. I know that the Mary piece is obviously really hard for Protestants to stomach, and people just don't get it necessarily. But I think so many of the ideas of it just translate so easily into people's lived experience of what we see in the culture every day, and just the narcissism and the anger and the bitterness that so many women are expressing every day. And people are trying to figure out how to grapple with it. How did it happen? Why does it continue? How do we protect our sons? How do we give men a voice back? All of these kinds of questions I think are still continually asked and raised. And I think this book answers it. But with a title like the AntiMary, you're only going to have a limited amount of people that would read it. So I've actually started a manuscript to start working on a more secular one again, and not backing away from who Our Lady is and the role model that she is, because I think that this is, the big irony is that this idea that women are equal came from Christ, but it also came from who Our Lady was and the dignity that is afforded to her, and just people recognizing who she is as the Mother of God. That's really why the idea took off. So anyway, I think that would be something that I would love to publish in the future, and hopefully, if I can squeeze out enough time from my schedule over the next couple of years, I can get that out. But I think it's been just really interesting to see, who's interested and who's not. But I think, and the other thing I will say is that I was very gentle to men in this book. In fact, one woman pushed back and said, why aren't you blaming men for all this? And I said, well, we've blamed men for 50 years now for everything that's wrong in our culture. I think that there's room for one book to not like try and squash men, and to just look at our role as women in the culpability factor related to what's happened with the culture. So anyway, it's been interesting to see who's picked it up. There's a weightlifter that he's actually a Catholic convert. He does a lot on trying to promote real masculinity and femininity. And he ended up doing a shout out on Instagram about it, which was just fantastic. But it was just point. And actually at one point he used some of my language in a video that he did on the topic. So it's great to see it, in little ways, having an influence out in the culture. But yeah, it's been really nice to see. I think that men appreciate it, but they also come away from reading this book, seeing women with a new kind of compassion. And a lot of times I think men feel a lot of resentment towards women, but when they actually see how systematic this has been and how much we don't even realize how much the wool is being pulled over our eyes, then I think that helps them have a compassion and pity towards us that, previously was just irritation and resentment. So hopefully that's been somewhat healing for people as well.
Well, I think one of the things that you're pointing to right now is the difference of the voice of the radical feminist movement that kind of tells women and traps women in a way that they're really susceptible to falling, to say, you should, you have to, this is what you are, which is work and all of these kind of negative things. And then contrasting that with the voice of God that says, will you, I love you. Like you are made for heaven, you are made for eternity. Right. And calling that out and giving women that sense of freedom with God's voice is, I just think, so powerful. And I'm wondering what your advice is to kind of search for that voice. If we find ourselves caught in between those two narratives, how do we find the voice of God, and where will we notice it in our lives? Yeah,
I think that's a fantastic question. Partially because one of the things that we're so confused about is, what does it even mean to be a woman? There's a video of some women at the Women's March being asked that question, what does it mean to be a woman? And their answers are hysterical. They're not trying to be hysterical, but they're hysterical because they don't really have an answer. They can't define women. And I think most of us would be really hard pressed to define women, because we just don't have positive answers or role models or a sense of even what our womanhood is. And, that's one of the things that we did in our second book of Theology of Home, was really look at what does it mean to be a woman and dig into this idea. And, one of the things I loved, and I touched on a little bit in the AntiMary too, is just this idea of of women as carrying things, not just to carry them as a burden or to carry them, to be a burden, but because when we carry them, we also transform things. And, this is you pregnant, and nuns carrying our prayers and offering us back to God through their prayers. What a gift we have, both in virginity, but in motherhood, and also in spiritual motherhood, all these different ways that God allows us to embrace others and transform them for the good and give them back to God. And so, I think it's really exciting to start looking into what does it really mean to be a woman? Even we can see this in the language of the church. The church is called she. The church is a building. The name of the church is named after the word ship, which again, they're feminine words. They carry things. So I've loved just this aspect of it, because it's just great to have sort of these powerful visuals and ways to understand who we are, but also to see that receptivity. I love the concept of, this idea was given to me. I'd never read it before, but it was given to me in prayer, and I just was able to compare how, a woman's body biologically, spiritually, it sort of expresses itself in a similar way. The woman receives the seed of her husband. She's usually the first one to know that she's pregnant. She then carries a child to birth. Then she basically works herself out of a job to give this child life and to become a mature adult and live on their own. It's typically how it happens. Well, it happens exactly that way on a spiritual level, but we don't tell young women that God means for you to receive him. He wants to give you gifts that then you help bring to life. And we have these great examples of someone like, Mother Teresa. She had that very tiny idea. She had to go to India and help the poorest of the poor. And of course, look at what happened. She worked herself out of a job because she gave birth to this whole missionary work. And then when she died, it carries on. Mother Angelica is another example of that. But I think that happens for all of us on all, it can happen for all of us on all these biological, of course, but spiritual level. And we're not open and aware of that aspect. So I think it's these exciting and beautiful ways that we can start seeing women in a new light, instead of just this constant comparison to men, which has gotten so tedious and tiresome. And I think women want real content. And that's one of the fun things we're actually doing with our next book, with the Theology of Home at the Sea book, is really comparing women to the ocean, and just all of this great imagery that's in the ocean. There's a lot of great depth and mystery, and there's also storms, and there's also calm and healing and peace, and just drawing that out to help women have a stronger sense of really who they are, because that's what's missing in the culture.
You spoke earlier of how we don't have a lot of visible role models. And I'm just listening to your last answer. I'm just filled with a lot of gratitude that those saints in heaven, while we might not see them on the cover of a magazine, they work pretty hard to call out to us.
Yeah.
And to communicate with us in some really special ways. So I think we might still have the upper hand.
Well, we have them, and we also have their witness in their lives. And that's, of course, the beautiful thing. And I think one of the reasons, I'm at some point, I really want to do some research into the roots of feminism in general. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Protestants don't have the saints. They don't have female saints to model their lives after. And yet we have them in so many different ways and arrays, and just the different ways that God created female saints and use them is so beautiful. And I think that can be so telling about where God is calling us, the ones that we're attracted to and that speak to us as well. Certainly Our Lady is among them, or, the model of models. So yeah, there's certainly a lot to be said for that, and the importance of reading their biographies and writings too.
As we conclude here, I'd love to talk a little about Our Lady of Fatima. And there's a phrase that you put there, she fights like a mom, referring to Mary. And
yeah,
I know in the if you're out west and you got between cub bear and mama bear, that would not be good for you.
No.
And on May 13th in 1981, St. John Paul II was in his normal routine of hugging children and being out there, and a bullet came right at him. And it was as if Mary protected. He puts that a lot on Mary, that she deflected the bullet. She protected him. She fought truly like a mom for her son, John Paul II. Can you speak to Our Lady of Fatima's role and what you see coming towards here, and also about Mary's role about fighting for her children?
Yeah, well, and this I cover a great deal. If anybody wants to read a lot on it, my book, The Marian Option, really covers this. And I talk a lot about Fatima in there, in terms of just what Mary predicted, that the lies of Russia would spread to the rest of the world. And I think we often think of communism and socialism in terms of economics. And yet, as I outlined in this book, and, even 5 years ago, it feels even more important now because of what we're seeing in the culture. But what I talk about in that book is how Our Lady predicted all that, and how we saw in Russia what they really tried to do was change human nature. They really tried, again, back to this idea of women as robots, or robotnik, the workers, and that's. But the Russians rejected that because it was for outsiders that really, came in upon their culture. And so it has never really fit well. But this is what the difference between what's happened in Russia and what's happened in the United States is. The women were able to usher it in through women like Kate Millett and make it an argument that was very compelling. And so it just seeped into the culture in a very natural and just a stylish fad, really, that we've embraced. And now we can see that amped up even more, especially again with LGBT movement, but now with Black Lives Matter, because it's all the exact same language of, just how do we destroy the family, the nuclear family? How do we promote Marxism? Also, abortion is always worked into that calculus. And these are the very lies of Soviet Russia, was that human nature can be changed and we can make ourselves into whatever we want to be. And that's the big lie. Human nature is static. It doesn't change. There are certain things that can be changed, but human nature is not one of them. And this is why we still read the Odyssey, and we love it. We love the Odyssey. There's so many beautiful pieces of that, because our human nature hasn't fundamentally changed from these ancient Greeks. So anyway, I think that that's the one thing that we really have to be mindful of and watch for, is how is it, when are people trying to tinker with human nature? When are they trying to mess with the family? Those are always the telltale signs that you're in trouble, and that, this is not godly. And actually my colleague, my co-author, Noelle Mering, has just written a book called Awake, Not Woke, that really goes into the Black Lives Matter issue and really lays out from a Catholic perspective what the issues are, because a lot of it is very confusing and can feel like it has Christian roots, but it's confusing. So she does an amazing job. So if people want some, a way to build on this and see what's happened with Black Lives Matter and the woke culture, that's a fantastic resource to look into as well.
Carrie, thank you for taking time. I was hoping we get to see your children run through and be there.
Two of them are outside running through the yard and the sprinkler. I just, with the warning, don't cut yourself, because I can't help you. So,
oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. I love it. I really appreciate you taking some time out today for both Regina and I to talk with you. We're big fans, and I hope that my parish and all that watch this will be able to pick up any of your books, really. But the AntiMary Exposed and then the Theology of Home are just tremendous books, as well as what we just saw on Mary. You led me by looking at the back of AntiMary prayers to combat the anti-Mary to a saint I'd never heard of before. Full disclosure, Saint AntiMary. What's the last name? Taiji?
Yeah. It's pronounced, depends, but yeah, Taiji is the typical pronunciation. Mm-hmm.
Oh, my, and she's an incorrupt saint. She's was a life that was quite challenging, and turns out to be the patroness of mothers and families, and just about anything that's challenging she'll take on. So she's a great intercessor. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just finish by praying this prayer that you place in here. So the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Prayer to defeat the devil by Saint AntiMary Taiji. Prostrate at thy feet, O great Queen of Heaven, we venerate thee with the deepest reverence, and we confess that thou art the daughter of the Father, the mother of the divine word, the spouse of the Holy Ghost. Thou art the storekeeper and the almoner of divine mercies. For this reason we call thee Mother of divine compassion. Behold us here in affliction and anguish. Deign to show us thy true love. We beg thee to ask the Holy Trinity most fervently to grant us the grace to ever conquer the evil of the world and of evil passions, the efficacious grace that sanctifies the just, converts sinners, destroys heresies, enlightens infidels, and brings all men to share the true faith. Obtain for us the great gift that all the world may form but one people united in the one true church. Mary, Mother of Holy Hope, pray for us. Amen.
Amen.